So, hi, good morning, everyone. So, welcome to the second chapter of our BA 99.1. So, as mentioned, in terms of our schedule for the next few days, actually just came up from a meeting with our other professors. And in terms of your first quiz, parang we've decided na since again, going back to parang the setup of BA 99.1, right? Parang departmental siya. So meaning that parang all classes should take it at the same time. So now, unfortunately, there's Wednesday, Friday classes. So the only common date that we could find would be Monday. So parang every Monday we'll have a quiz. So the good thing about this is that you'll have enough time to prepare kasi usually what happens is by Tuesday, we're already done with the chapter 1 or the chapter that will be quizzed upon. And then the Thursday will be more moving on to chapter 2. Pero yung quiz nyo for Monday will be on chapter 1. So now, in terms of the process, given na we're all online and parang in terms of submission, we're gonna give a period from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. of Monday, wherein we'll give you the time to look at the quiz and then handwrite your answers and then parang scan it and then send it to us via email. So now, given that there's a 12-hour period, hopefully parang this accounts for all parang unforeseen circumstances like nawala yung internet, etc., etc. So, kindly let me know kung merong mga issues by September 19, I think, by so Monday yun. If meron kayong issues na na-anticipate. So again, going back to our parang syllabus, parang for your excuse to be valid, it has to be before the exam, before the quiz date. So meaning parang you can't tell me ng 8 p.m. ng Monday na, oh sorry, parang mayroong problem, ganyan-ganyan. I-anticipate nyo na, inform me beforehand so that your excuse will be valid. So for late submissions, given that it's a 12-hour period, unfortunately, if you can't submit on time, you'll be given a 0. So kindly make sure na you give enough time for you to calmly be able to solve it in order for you to submit by 9 p.m. of Monday. So another question that people would commonly ask is, okay, so 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. siya, so you have a 12-hour period. Is it open book? So honestly, it shouldn't be. So meaning parang our expectation is we're giving you the 12-hour period, pero we expect na out of that 12-hour period, you take around 1 to 2 hours to really sit down and write your answers without, number one, referring to any past lectures. And then number two, definitely not consulting everyone. So honestly, those are grounds for cheating. And in terms of implementation, admittedly, parang wala naman kaming, parang it's really honor and excellence at this point na if you really wanted to discuss, we wouldn't be able to track it, right? But then, going back, in terms of parang what we really envision for you to be like the next generation leaders, we really want na you have the confidence to take it on your own. So again, I'm here naman and the other profs are here that if hindi nyo gets yung lesson, before Monday definitely, you can consult us. So parang over the weekend, kung kinakabahan kayo or there are things na parang you want to check up on, you can still schedule a consultation with me para lang we go through the things that you're unsure about. So I feel like everything naman na we've done, we've given everything at your disposal. All you have to do is be confident and apply what we've learned in class. So yun, parang that's just like a quick reminder. And then after our lecture, if we have time, I'll already show you parang the directions so that hindi na kayo magugulat by Monday. So before I proceed to our formal lecture, are there any questions regarding the quiz on Monday? Yeah. If none, kindly give me a thumbs up so that I know if we can proceed na to the recording process. Okay. Thank you, everyone. So, okay. So actually, that's it lang naman for the quiz. So now we move on to the recording process. So in chapter 1, basically what we did was that we looked at the accounting principles and the conceptual framework. So ano ba yung basics ng accounting? What are the key definitions? What are the underlying rules? What are the underlying enhancing or fundamental qualitative characteristics of information, its importance? And then ultimately, we ended with the accounting equation. So assets is equal to liabilities and equity. And then from there, rounding it out with our 5 financial statements. So looking through how do we actually write the statements for income statement, statement of changes in owner's equity, and then ultimately your financial position. So now in chapter 2, we're gonna be taking a deep dive na from an accountant's perspective. So going back, accounting is all about, one of the parts of accounting is bookkeeping, right? And under that would be your recording process. So for chapter 2, actually super bilis lang nito. This is really more about going through the concepts of how to record and then parang giving you examples in order for you to visualize it. But then this chapter, even though it's short, it's very important and very crucial na you understand parang the recording process. Kasi this is gonna be your tool in order for you to tackle any future parang accounting lectures or accounting concepts when you take a deep dive per each account, right? So for today's lesson, basically we broke it down again into 3 parts and then 6 learning objectives. So again, we use the BAA framework, right? So number 1, definitely we have to broaden our understanding again of the business context. So we're going to be taking a look at how do we actually define what an account is, and in relation to an account, what is a T account and what are debits and credits. Number 2, once we're clear in terms of like the definitions of what our accounts are and how to use a T account, then we account for transactions and we master the recording process. Meaning the next 3 objectives would be number 1, an overview of the recording process for accounting. Then second, we'll be creating our journal entries. And then third or fifth will be our posting of entries, right? So again, for me, whenever I encounter any new lesson in accounting, so para for example, cash or accounts receivable or inventory. So basically kasi what you can expect in the future lessons is we're gonna be taking a deep dive. Parang what are all the transactions related to cash? Or what are all the concepts related to accounts receivable? Usually, pag nawawala ako in theory, ang pinangkakapitan ko is what are the journal entries that we'll be recording. So for me, super important na you really master what a journal entry is and the underlying concept or the underlying theory behind it. And then finally, the last step would be analyzing the financial statement. And one of the tools in order to prepare financial statements, so not usually naman ginagawa to every time, but one of the tools is what we call the trial balance. So using the trial balance, this is like your secondary measure in order to make sure that everything is balanced. So again, these are the 6 learning objectives that we expect to learn today. So kindly let me know rin pala kung medyo laggy because I think sabi it's a bit unstable, but hopefully not. So kindly chat na lang or message or call me out kung if there's something that parang the audio is broken. Okay. So now that we're clear with the objectives, we can take a deep dive na into the first 2 learning objectives. So number 1, what are accounts nga ba? And then what is debit and credit? So usually pag nalalaman ng mga tao na, oh, you're an accountant, oh, debit and credit, right? So it's like one of the most used parang phrases in relation to the accounting profession. But my request is that particularly and specifically for the ones that haven't taken any accounting course, I know na in the real world, we have other definitions attached to debit and credit, like credit card, debit card, etc., etc. But for this particular lesson, I want you to strip away all of your preconceived, definitions for debit and credit because accounting has a very simplistic way of defining them. But first, let's first define what are accounts. So actually, accounts is something that you're very familiar with. So in essence, the strict definition of an account is that it is the building block of the accounting equation and the different components. So if you ask what is the formal definition, it is the individual accounting record of increases and decreases in a specific asset, liability, or equity. So in essence, if you're gonna be asking me, so what are the accounts that we've already discussed? You can break it down into the different accounting components, right? So under your assets, your different accounts would be: one, you have your cash. Second, you have your receivables account. Third, you have your supplies account, right? And then fourth is inventory. Five is prepaid expenses. And then six would be your property, plant, and equipment. Next, what would be your liabilities, or what are the accounts under your liability component? Some examples include: number one, the accounts payable account, right? And then you also have your accrued expenses account, and then your notes payable account, right? So, and then the last two would be your interest payable, and then your other salaries or wages payable. And then finally, under equity, what are the accounts under equity? The four major components, right? So you have your owner's capital, your owner's drawing, and then your revenue and your expenses. So under each account, basically, the reason why you segment them into these different categorizations is so that for every transaction that happens around the period, you'll be able to plug it in under that account so that you can account ano ba nga ba yung beginning balance ng account na to? What are the things that helped it increase? What are the things that helped it decrease? Right? And ultimately, what is the ending balance of these accounts for in preparation for various financial statements, right? So in terms of the accounting profession, we actually have this thing called the chart of accounts. So in essence, for every company, if it's formally organized, right, they have what they call the chart of accounts for their accounting department. So the chart of accounts actually lists down the accounts and the account numbers that identify their location in what they call a ledger. So in essence, whenever they account, basically para lang silang may table, like the one on the right, and then they break it down into number one, yung mga reference number. So as you can see, the ones that are starting with one are referring to a specific account type, which would be assets. The ones under number two would be liabilities. Number three would be equity. Four would be revenue. Five would be expenses. And then six would be your catch-all or your basin, so your other. And then they also tell you parang what are the affected financial statements. So, di ba, ang balance sheet is all basically your ending position for your assets, liabilities, and equity. Your income statement naman, your major components would be your revenue, expenses, and then your net income or net loss, right? So, naka-itemize rin. And then under each under each number, you have a specific account. So basically 10001 refers to cash. 120 refers to prepaid expenses. 320 refers to additional paid-in capital. So in terms of like writing your journal entries, these are the phrases, these are the accounts na you will use. So for example, the company A uses utilities expense. So for example, nag-incur ka ng expenses like your electricity bill, right? So you don't put it as electricity expense. You strictly have to put it as utilities expense. So that's for company A. So let's say company B is a major fan of Meralco. So rather than naming their electricity expense as utilities expense, in their chart of accounts, they decided to name it Meralco expense, right? So given for particular company B, we have to respect their designation. We have to respect their chart of accounts. And therefore, whenever we incur electricity bill, the right way to refer to that would be Meralco expense, given that yun yung nakalagay sa chart of accounts nila. If we write utilities expense, the people under company B would be like, what are you pertaining to? Parang hindi namin to alam. Parang ganun. So, in essence or in practice, the chart of accounts would be your friend, right? Kasi pag hindi mo alam paano ko ba i-classify ito, you look at your chart of accounts and then you look at the most similar. This is actually particularly helpful for how companies categorize revenues and expenses. Kasi iba-iba naman yung pag-categorize ng companies on what are the revenues that they are parang important to them? What are the expenses important to them? Because some aren't as important as others. So your chart of accounts can really give you a lot of information. So now, the next question is, okay, so an account is supposedly parang a component of on either assets, liabilities, or equity. Now, the next question is, it mentioned that it tracks increases or decreases. Now, the question would be, how do you actually record for the changes in an account? And for this, accountants actually have this very useful tool, which is what we call the T account. So very creative, diba? So parang the T account basically shows you the history of an account. So if you have a T account for a specific account or asset, liabilities, or equity, you'll be able to determine three things. What is the beginning balance of that particular account? Number two, what are the changes in the account? And then number three would be the ending balance. So the most common question is, bakit nga ba siya tawag na T account? Well, basically because it looks like a T, right? So the most basic format of a T account is this T, right? But to just add like borders, we just add those two lines to signify na the ones at the bottom would be your ending balance, right? Yun. So with that said, what are the components, right? So number one is your title of account. So title of account means that the title of the account means that dun mo ilalagay, is it cash, is it accounts receivable, etc., right? And then in terms of like the changes in the account, we actually have two that affects the account. Your debit or the left side and credit, the right side. So basically you have numerous debits and probably numerous credits also. And then at the end, pagbabanggain natin sila, so you'll be able to see it later in the exercises, in order for you to arrive with the ending balance. So like what I mentioned, for those specifically na wala pang accounting background ever, again, ang only definition natin ng debit and credit is, the debit is your left side of the T account and your credit is the right. It's not an increase or a decrease or whatever. It's just left and right. Okay? So to make sense of this, let's revisit the accounting equation, right? So ultimately, we mentioned again that everything that you own can be attributed to two sources, right? Either one, you sourced it from a third party, meaning that comes from liabilities that you eventually have to pay, or two, you put it up by yourself or your own owner's equity, right? So therefore, our accounting equation would be assets is equal to liabilities plus equity. But looking at it from a math perspective or looking at it from an equation perspective, your left-hand side, which would be the assets, is equal to your right-hand sides, which would be your liability and equity. So in essence, your left side or your debit is equal to your right side, your credit, right? So if we simplify this further, basically, your debits or your left-hand side should equal your credits, okay? So in accounting, the second most important would be your debits should always equal your credits, right? So that is just as important as the assets is equal to liabilities and equity. And therefore, to summarize, we have our basic accounting equation wherein you have your assets is equal to your liabilities and equity. So that's the God accounting equation. But because of this, we also derive another insight, that our debits must equal to our credits for each transaction at any point in time, right? So your debits or your the things on your left side should equal your credits or the things on your right side. So alternatively, by doing this, diba? So debits and credits, your left side should be equal to your right side even in your expanded accounting equation, right? So in essence, parang assets, your left side should be equal to your liabilities plus owner's capital plus revenue minus expense minus owner's drawings. However, in order for us to parang easier, parang mas madali sa atin maging familiar with the debit and credit concepts. When we look at debit and credits, usually we eliminate negatives in the equation, right? So we eliminate negatives. So actually, you'll see this or you'll appreciate this more on the trial balance, okay? Pero we try to eliminate the negatives. So what are the negatives in our equation, in our expanded accounting equation? Technically, it's just expense and owner's drawings, right? So kailangan ilipat natin siya sa kabila, right? So, 'di ba, basic math, right? So you want expense to be positive, right? So ililipat mo siya sa kabila for it to be positive. Same with owner's drawings. So now, we'll be able to have our new version of our expanded accounting equation. Still the same equation, we just move things around so walang negatives, right? So number one, we have our assets. Yeah, so basically it's still in the same side. Expense goes to the other side kasi we want it to be positive. Owner's drawings, we want it to be positive also. We goes to the other side. And then liabilities, owner's capital, and revenue still stay on the same side, right? So in essence, your debits or the ones on your left changed, right? In this particular accounting equation. Now, basically, parang what we have would be your debits, which would be your assets plus expense plus owner's drawings, should equal your credits, which would be your liabilities plus owner's capital plus revenue. So bakit importante, or why do I call it the debit credit version, right? Because under each component of the accounting equation, meron siyang normal balance, right? So may normal balance siya. And by using the debit credit version, you'll be easily, parang mas madali na sa inyo to know ano ba yung normal balance of the account. You just ask yourself, right? Ano ba? Nasa left side ba siya or sa right side? Everything that was on the left of this debit credit version of the expanded accounting equation will have a normal balance of a debit, right? Everything on your right side, which would be your liabilities, owner's capital, and revenue, will be your credit, right? So this is still our T accounts. So right now, we have 6 T accounts for our 6 major components of the expanded accounting equation. Next thing that we did, we identified what their normal balance are. So what are the normal balances, right? So the things on the left have a normal debit balance, particularly your assets, your expense, your owner's drawings. And then the ones on the right, you have your credit balance, your liabilities, your owner's capital, and revenue. And the reason why this is so important is because in accounting, we use a double entry system. So we'll also be able to see it in the next few slides. But in essence, every transaction will affect at least one debit and one credit, and that will maintain the balance of the accounting equation, right? So now that we know the normal balances of these accounts, the next thing that you need to know is that if debit yung balance niya, they would increase for every debit. Meaning, your assets will increase for every debit because that's their normal balance. Your expense will increase for every debit because that's its normal balance. Your owner's equity will increase for every debit because that's its normal balance. On the other side, the things that will increase your liabilities, owner's capital, and revenue will be credits, right? So credits, credits, credits. And then, obviously, if sa one side nag-increase, then the opposite will make it decrease. So a credit in an asset will decrease it. A credit in an expense will decrease it. A credit in an owner's drawings will decrease it. Kasi yun yung baliktad against the normal balance. And then alternatively, a debit for a liability will decrease it. A debit in owner's capital will decrease it. And then a debit in revenue will decrease it. So honestly, for the main lesson for today, it's basically this slide. na parang ultimately, I hope you were able to understand paano natin na-derive parang the T accounts for the 6 major accounting components. Pero for those na parang medyo parang hinihimay pa the concepts, let it soak. Pero ultimately, what I want you to do is to memorize this. Dapat second nature na sa atin. Ano normal balance ng expense? Debit. Anong normal balance ng liabilities? Credit. Okay, nagkaroon ka ng debit sa asset. That would be increase or decrease. The normal balance of an asset is debit. Therefore, a debit will cause an increase. Next, what about the debit for revenue? Will that increase or decrease? Well, the revenue has a normal credit balance and therefore a debit is gonna decrease our revenue. So parang ganun lang siya, right? So don't worry, parang right now, parang just accept, memorize. And then eventually, whenever we do the journal entries, parang you'll just be surprised na parang magic siya na everything will balance because of this double entry accounting system. So to further reinforce these concepts, right? Let's first go to our assets, right? So an example of an asset would be cash, right? So if may nakita kayong debit cash, that would mean an increase in your cash account. So that's 5 plus 5,000 pesos. Alternatively, if sinabing credit cash for 5,000 pesos, that would mean a decrease, right, of negative 5,000. So consistent naman siya, right? So pag debit for an asset, it will increase. Pag credit, it will decrease. Next, for expenses, right? So for expenses, if they tell you debit expense 800, that means that your expenses incurred increases by 800. So from 0 expense, naging 800 expense. Alternatively, if they say a credit to expense, that means a deduction of your expense. So pare, 800 lang talaga yung expense mo, pero parang nagkamali yung accountant. 1,600 yung nalagay niya. So in order to correct this, one of the components of the journal entry would be a credit to your expense. And meaning na from 1,600 expense, if you credit 800 in expense, 1,600 minus 800, which is a decrease, will give you your correct balance, which would be 800. So again, your debit will increase your expenses, your credit will decrease your expenses. Same concept with owner's drawings, right? A debit of owner's drawing of 575 will increase the owner's drawings, meaning it will increase the amount na you attribute na kinuha from the economic entity. But a credit will mean that basically bumama si owner's drawings, right? So pinababa niya si owner's drawings, right? So again, the normal balance for the left-hand side or your assets, expense, owner's drawings would be your debit, right? So that is our first side. Let's go to the right side. So again, the thing for right side of the equation, their normal balance would be credit. So baliktad, right? So ang liabilities mo, when you say debit liabilities, that would mean a decrease in your liabilities, right? So for example, you have 6,000 starting balance for your accounts payable. If I say debit 3,000, meaning yung 6,000 mo, babawasan mo ng 3,000. So 3,000 na lang yung accounts payable mo. Conversely, if you have a 6,000 starting accounts payable, if I say credit 3,000, your account payable would be 9,000 because it increased. So again, for debit, it will decrease any liability account. For credit, it will increase any liability account. Same concept with our owner's capital, wherein a debit will decrease it and then a credit will increase, right? So basically, pag sinabing an owner infused more money, right? So more money means that your owner's capital would increase. Therefore, that would be a credit owner's capital at 100 because that will increase. Pero alternatively, if it says debit owner's capital, that would be a decrease in your owner's capital account. Same logic with revenue. A credit is a good thing for revenue. It will increase your revenue. but a debit will decrease your revenue. So again, that's just basically a quick rundown of your debits and your credits. What are the normal balances and what are the effects of a debit and a credit to a particular account. So before I move on, do you have any questions regarding this particular concept? Or clear naman? Yeah. So Denise, clear. Okay, good. So actually, that's better. So ako talaga before start ng 19, I was like, what are debits and credit? Sobrang ano. So actually, nung mga first 2 quizzes ko, memorize ko lang yan. Hindi ko pa siya masyadong magets. But ultimately, in time, when we do more journal entries, that will come naturally for you. But I hope na the explanation was able to make you appreciate why yung normal balances on the left side are debits and the right side would be credit. In our next lecture, I'll try to explain it in another way, in a more mathematical way, so that for the mathematical people out here, parang baka they'll appreciate that better. But moving on, let's go back to our P1.1, right? So the reason why I wanted to revisit this is that same with Macy, it's just as important. And hopefully natatandaan niyo pa si Meowly travel agency, right? So in essence, there are 12 transactions under Meowly's travel agency. So why did I want to go back here? So this is gonna be our master exercise. So for everyone, if you have access to your Meowly financial statements or your solutions, kindly bring them out para you'll be able to see or appreciate the discussion on how we apply the recording process for Meowly. But in essence, the first thing that I wanted to share is that kuwari si Meowly, meron siyang chart of accounts, right? So a sample chart of accounts would look like this. So your chart of accounts is broken down into your components of accounting equation. So you have your assets, your liabilities, your owner's equity, your revenue, and your expenses. And then usually, they're grouped by hundreds. So 100s usually refer to assets. 200s usually refer to liabilities. 300s refers to owner's equity. 400s would refer to revenue. And 500 plus would be your expenses. So yun lang, parang chart of accounts, right? So in essence, there are how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So under the chart of accounts, there are 16 accounts under the company. And therefore, in any accounting period, you'll expect na you'll be able to make 16 T accounts for each of the accounts stated, right? So going back to Meowly, this is a copy of our advanced transaction analysis. Now, the only reason why I wanted to bring it up is that I want you to appreciate what a T account does, right? So how do we do that? We first focus on one account, and para exciting, let's pick the account that has the most changes para we'll be able to see. So the most changes are cash, right? So let's zone in on our cash. And then on the other side, I created RT accounts, right? So RT account will again compose of 4 components. The first component is the title of the account, pero this one is represented by the logo and then the cash. Pero ultimately, this is just the cash title of the account. And then underneath, in order for you to record your debits and credits, so debit on the left, credit on the right, and then ultimately, we expect na dito sa baba, we'll see our ending balance. So madali lang to. So basically, if you have a T account, it's more of your tool in order to summarize the changes in an account. So for every transaction, you ask yourself, na-mention ba yung account na to? If yes, you ask, the next question is, debit or credit ko siya ilalagay? So definitely, for all these 12 transactions, these all pertain to cash. So the expectation is transaction 1 will go to the T account, transaction 2, etc., etc. And then we do it chronologically, right? So number 1, it said na nag-increase yung cash natin by 15,000. So an increase in cash is a debit, right? Because the normal balance of a cash is debit. So yung 15,000 natin, we put it under the debit account. Conversely, the negative 600 is a decrease in our cash. And ano ulit yung normal balance ng cash? It's debit. So any credit will decrease our cash. So sa kabila natin ilalagay si 600. Right? So using that, parang first two, we'll be able to solve for the next 10 transactions, right? So transaction 3, decrease in 3,000. So that would be a credit in cash. The next is minus 900, a decrease in cash, therefore credit again. Then the next would be an increase in cash, and therefore pag increase, that would be a debit. And then the next three would be decreases. So minus 600, minus 500, and then minus 2,500, right? And then, sorry. And then the next two would be increases. So that would be debits. So 4,000 debit cash, 5,000 debit cash. So now, let me just get my calculator. Kindly thumbs up kung nakikita yung calculator. Sorry. Okay, perfect. So now, the next step is we total our debits and credits, right? So this is your T account. So the reason why may extra pang ganito is this is for your subtotals, right? So ang nauna is si debits. So let's double check if it's 27,000. So it's 15 plus 3,000 plus 4,000 plus 5,000. So 27,000, right? Alternatively, let's solve for the subtotal of our credits, right? So you have 600 plus 3,000 plus 900 plus 600 plus 500 plus 25. So 8,100. Okay. So now we have our subtotal debit for cash at 27,000 and a subtotal of credit of 8,100. Now, dito ko sinasabi na ipagbabangga nyo. So what does ipagbabangga mean? 27 minus 8,100. That's basically it. So 27 minus 8,100. So it's positive, right? So 8,900 meaning it's a debit, right? So same dito, 8,900, right? So debit balance. So as you can see, pag positive si cash, it's normally a debit, right? So normal debit. So pag credit yung cash ang ending balance, yung meaning you have negative cash, right? So, that's parang not natural, not normal. So again, the normal balance of cash is debit. Before we proceed to another component of equity or of the accounting equation, may questions ba tayo? Or not? Okay. So kung wala naman, wala naman. We can move on to the other side. Punta naman tayo sa mga other components. The reason why I pick accounts payable is because the accounts payable, ang normal credit niya, ang normal balance niya is what? Credit, right? Normal accounts payable is credit. So, basically, baliktad si accounts payable. Yung 700, since it's an increase in accounts payable, meaning that should fall under your credit. Right? Credit. Kasi baliktad, credit yung normal balance niya. Alternatively, decreases in accounts payable will fall under your debit. Right? And therefore, tapos na yung two transactions for the whole period. So we subtotal the debit and credit. So you have a subtotal of 500 and minus 500 and credit of 700. So again, the next step is so that we know the ending balance, pagbabanggain natin. So ano ba yung yung credit is 700 minus 500. So ultimately, we have 200 in credit. So this is the normal balance of your accounts payable. You expect it to be on the credit side, right? Okay. Moving on to expense. Kindly chat, what is the normal balance of an expense coming from our master equation? Is it debit or credit? Yeah, debit, right? Good. So, given a debit siya, baliktad naman, right? So, okay, wag tayong malilito. 'Di ba sabi ko before na yung advanced transaction analysis, yung expense nyo in your owner's drawings will be negative, right? Negative to. So, a negative 600 means an increase in expense, right? An increase in expense. And therefore, since it's an increase in expense, debit natin siya ilalagay, right? So, same with the 700, same with the 25. And if we subtotal that, that's 3,800 debit. So that means that your expense increased to 3,800. And then just naturally, expense kasi is such a negative account, right? So that's why may parenthesis siya. And then you have 3,800. So the ending balance for your expenses for the period is 3,800. Okay. So that actually ends your T accounts and your parang debits and credits. So clear pa naman so far. Kindly thumbs up if okay so that we can proceed na to the recording process. For those that have questions, wag kayo mahiya. Kindly let me know lang kung meron or confusing. So I promise na we'll also go over it again next time when we solve for exercise. So okay, so I hopefully everything's clear kasi that's gonna be our bread and butter moving on to the next 4 learning objectives. So next, we go na to the recording process, right? So admittedly, yung basic transaction analysis and advanced transaction analysis, these are very helpful tools, but in real accounting, parang ang mas preferred method and the way talaga we do is we record journal entries, right? In our bookkeeping. But ultimately, journal entries is just one part of the recording process. And in essence, the recording process actually has 3 major parts. First is you analyze the transaction. So actually, experts na tayo dito. We know na to identify which accounts are affected given a transaction and then determining kung increase ba yun or decrease in a specific account. So that would pertain to your basic transaction analysis or your advanced transaction analysis. The only 2 things that we need to learn today would be journalizing the entries and posting to ledger accounts. So what do I mean by journal entries? So a journal entry kasi, so imagine, ang companies, parang tao yan, right? So a journal is a company's diary, right? And the general journal is basically the God diary of any company. So basically, yung formal entries would be the records of parang ano ba yung nangyari sa day niya, ganun. Is it a good day, is it a bad day? So your journal entries represent your transactions, right? Across a whole period. And then, usually, parang similar lang rin to Instagram, right? Parang mayroong popular yung parang August recap, ganyan-ganyan, or parang September recap. Siyempre, aside from a diary, we need to summarize what happened for the month para maalala natin. So that's in essence what we mean by posting to ledger accounts. So honestly, if I had to break it down, di ba I just taught you how to do a T account. In essence, T account is just basically the whole posting process wherein yung whole cash, the changes and decreases, we just tabulated in a T account. Where yung ledger account kasi is really just more of a formal documenty type. So basically, that's the overview. We have 3 steps. Analyze the transaction, journalize the entry, and then post to your ledger account, right? So parang fundamentally, this is how it looks like, right? So we have, or the thing that we're familiar with is advanced transaction analysis. So the question is, do you have to write an advanced transaction analysis? Honestly, no. Parang this should happen in your head whenever you read a transaction. Parang automatic na. Parang, what are the accounts that are being affected? And then, parang, is it an increase or decrease? And then yung isusulat nyo, honestly, should be what you call a journal entry, which we'll discuss rin naman in the next period. Pero a journal entry will pertain to 2 or more accounts, right? So, for example, this particular journal entry talks about cash and owner's equity, right? So it's on a per transaction basis. Pero in order to summarize the changes in our cash, similar to our T accounts, wala tayong pakidapat kay owner's equity. Ang paki lang natin are the debits and credits in cash. So, yung 15,000 na nandito, itatabulate natin dito sa debit. Ito may cash ulit. Sa third o 3,000 na credit na debit. So, parang dito yun. So, basically, parang ganun lang naman siya. Right? So basically, that's how you account for the whole recording process. So step 1, you analyze the transaction. Step 2, you write the journal entry. And then step 3, you summarize them in account ledgers, which are the formal equivalents of what we've already talked about, which is your T account. So first, let's focus on the first step, which is analyzing the transaction. So honestly, this is just for appreciation, pero this is also good to know. Na in Waygon or in our accounting class, sobrang helpful na nakasummarize na siya. Right? Na parang yung number of transactions in a month is already parang jotted down from 1 to 12. Pero honestly, in practice, kailangan actually yan ng supporting documents or supporting accounting documents. So in essence, these 12 items that you see in Miaoli's travel agency were taken from various supporting documents. Either your sales invoice, billing, official receipt, contract, voucher, deposit slips. So using these documents, you'll be able to arrive with these summaries of transactions, right? And then, basically, when we come to analyze Miaoli, like what I mentioned, for this particular part, honestly, analyzing transactions, ang kailangan nyo lang talagang malaman is, ano ba yung accounts affected? And then increase ba siya or decrease? Right? But given na we're all studying fundamental accounting, gagamit muna tayo ng advanced transaction analysis in T accounts just so that you can illustrate or parang ma-reinforce lang these concepts for us. So with that said, I just chose 4 items from Miaoli's travel agency that would parang give us parang a general feel of parang how to identify and then what it would look like given that we're also applying T accounts, right? So the 4 are the ones highlighted below. So again, super important to have your copy with you para hindi tayo mawala. And then aside from this, super important rin na I want you to focus on the process, not the particular amounts. That's the reason why we're revisiting Miaoli. I want you to parang understand lang the process. And then don't worry, at the end of this lecture, we'll end with like a whole recording process of a new exercise. Pero mas madali. Kasi ito ang hirap kasi bunuin na 12 right? So later, we'll have like a full example. Dun magki-click hopefully. Okay. So now, first step, we analyze, right? So ano ba yung first journal entry ni Miaoli? Invested 15,000 cash to start the agency, right? So again, step 1, we identify what are the accounts affected. 15,000 cash, so that's an increase. And then my investments or infusion, so owner's capital, right? So we can confidently say na there is an increase in cash of 15,000 and an increase in owner's capital, right? So now, paano yan? The thing that I want you to show you is that whenever we have T accounts, usually yung T accounts yun nasa solving paper nyo. And every time you have a transaction, chronologically, you input it sa T account. So you start with 0 T accounts and then na-mention si cash. Let's first create the T account for cash. Na-mention si owner's capital. Let's mention the T account for owner's capital, right? And then we do the debit credit analysis. Number 1, your cash increased by 15,000. The normal balance of your cash is debit, and therefore we debit the 15,000 in cash, right? Next, owner's capital. So si owner's capital, nasa right side yan, right? So, meaning, the normal balance of an owner's capital is a credit, not a debit. And therefore, an increase in owner's capital will be a credit in owner's capital. So ganun lang, right? So for every transaction, you analyze and then you write it in your T account to summarize. So in essence, actually, nagpo-posting na kayo at this point. But you know, this is just for appreciation, right? So next, and the next item na I wanted to focus on, okay, what if you incurred 700 of advertising cost for Facebook ads on account? So for this, the two accounts that are affected, again, would be what? Your expense and your, dahil on account, accounts payable. So in essence, what happened? Nag-increase si expense ng 700 signified by the negative kasi, you know, negative accounts expense. And then may 700 ka in accounts payable, meaning tumaas si accounts payable ng 700. So again, so bagong dalawang accounts na na-affect. So the next step is for you to write your new P accounts. One for expense, one for accounts payable. And then we do the same analysis. So yung expense first. Again, the expense increased raw by 700. And as you pointed out, your expense normal balance is a debit, right? So an increase in your expense would mean a debit in your expense T account. And then, nag-increase naman si accounts payable. And the normal balance of an accounts payable or any liability is a credit. So nag-increase ng 700, therefore, 700 credit. Okay, third. So again, we analyze what are the three accounts affected by this. Well, definitely number one, we have 10,000 in revenue, 3,000 in cash, and 7,000 in accounts receivable, right? So nag-increase si revenue, nag-increase si cash, nag-increase si receivable. So out of these three accounts, meron na tayong si cash, right? So let's just make for receivable and revenue at the account. So revenue and receivables. Next, si revenue increased, right? And the revenue has a normal credit account. So we credit 10,000. And then si cash and receivables, they're assets, and the normal balance of assets are debits. So therefore, we debit 3,000 to signify the increase, and we debit 7,000 to signify the increase. So in essence, parang ganito lang, nagtatabulate lang kayo so that you will be able to track the changes for each T account. So cash, owner's capital, expense, accounts payable, income, revenue. Pero you're doing it, so you're doing it in two levels. You're doing it on a per transaction level, and you're doing it on a per account level. Per transaction meaning what are the two accounts affected in every transaction, and then per account level means paano mo sinasummarize yung changes, right? So in essence, ganun lang naman account. So the last example is paid Facebook 500 of the amount due. So those are decreases in your cash and decreases in your accounts payable. So for this last, on a per transaction level, what we did was we determined that it decreased cash and we decreased accounts payable. But on a per account level, we look at cash first. So yung cash raw bumaba ng 500, and therefore this is a credit in cash. Right? And then accounts payable bumaba, right, na 500. Pero this is a debit in your liabilities because the normal balance of liabilities are credit balances. Right? So for these four transactions, na-analyze na natin siya thoroughly, right? On a per transaction level, meaning these two, per transaction level, and a per account level, right? So basically, that's it. That's how you analyze, right? So now we can move on to the second step, which would be creating journal entries. Before we move on, are there any questions with the first step, which is analyzing transactions? So none. Okay, so I think we can proceed. So the next step in the recording process is we create journal entries. But then, before that, ano nga ba yung journal? Like what I mentioned, a journal is a company's diary. So it lists the chronological record of transactions. So it shows the debit and the credit effect of every transaction on the specific account at every date that there was a transaction that happened. So in essence, the reason why we love journal entries is because it upholds what we call a double entry system, which I'll go to in a while, right? But in essence, because of the double entry, we're assured that our debits is equal to our credits. So next would be, what are the two types of journals? So first, we have your general journal. So this is our God journal, wherein all company transactions are recorded. So lahat ng nangyari sa company, as long as it's relevant to our financial transactions, lahat yan mapupunta sa general journal. So you always refer to your general journal. Pero what if parang 'di ba, parang what if kuwari yung trabaho mo naman sales manager, right? Parang hassle naman na basahin lahat sa general journal. And that's why we also have special journals wherein it's only similar types of transactions that are already listed there, right? So some examples of special journals would be sales journal, purchase, cash receipts, cash disbursements. So to cement our understanding, these are parang sample general journals, special journals. General journal, you can see what are the accounts under general journal. Pwedeng depreciation, accumulated depreciation, bad debt, allowance for doubtful accounts. So lahat, even the accounts that you haven't heard of, lahat yan nasa general journal. Conversely, for the special journal, particularly for cash receipts, ang pakialam lang natin would be the cash receipts, right? So tinan mo, here in June 3, we got 5,500 in cash receipts because of a 550 accounts receivable. We had 550 amount because of a cash sale. 350 receipt again for accounts receivable. So for the people that only care about the cash receipts, ang titingnan na lang niya for the interest of time would be your cash receipts journal. Right? So now, we go to the building blocks of our recording process, which would be our journal entry. So I want you to understand that a journal entry is just basically our formal entry of a transaction to our journal. So basically, itatranscribe lang natin tong paragraph na to into our diary entry or our journal entry for the company. So itong invested 15,000 in cash to start the agency, we just write it into our very first journal entry, which would be a debit in cash of 15,000 and a credit in owner's equity of 15,000. So if you're going back to the T account on our first kay Meowly, diba, you notice, yun rin yung ginawa natin. Nag-increase si cash ng 15,000, so debit 15,000. Nag-increase si owner's equity, pero dahil credit yung normal balance niya, that's credit 15,000. Right? So that basically what a journal entry looks like. So now, himayin natin, right? What are the parts of a formal journal entry? So number one, you have your date. So again, whenever you encounter a comprehensive problem, you have to journal chronologically. So number your journal entries according to date. So here we have April 1. Next, you have your reference. So you see yung ref, nakalagay 101 and 301. Basically, it just refers to your chart of accounts code. Diba? Under the chart of accounts of Meowly, sabi niya 101 cash. So cash, 101. Si owner's equity, 301. So 301. So C stands for credit. So you have your credit. So in every journal entry, you have to have at least one credit. At least one. D stands for debit. So again, for every entry, you have to at least have one debit. And then lastly, you have your explanation, right? So 5 parts. A, the date. So the date. 2, B, your reference number, which you can find in your chart of accounts. C stands for your credit. D stands for your debit. And then E stands for your explanation, right? So in essence, this is what a typical journal entry looks like. Now, the reason why we super love the journal entry is because it upholds what we call double entry accounting. Wherein, again, it states that it has at least one debit, meaning one debit, so left side, and one credit, right side. And by doing this, na at least may one side na debit and one side credit, we're able to make sure that you're balanced at every transaction. So going back dun sa mga maarting normal balances, the reason why they're like that is by naturally, when you record accounts, naturally it will flow na magde-debit and credit the usual relationship. In that, it will even it out into the perfect balance of the accounting equation. So now, let's do sample journal entries, right? Say, using the same example, using the 4 particular ones that we discussed already. So this is where we left off, right? But again, it's hard to visualize the story with the accounts or the analysis table. This is more of like taking note na of the summary. And journal entries account on a per transaction date level, right? So let's start doing journal entries para we appreciate it. So again, we invested 15,000 cash to start the agency. The journal entry would be nag-increase si cash, and therefore nag-increase si cash, that's debit, 15,000. Nag-increase si owner's capital, so that's credit, 15,000. So your journal entry would be cash, debit of 15,000, so DR means debit, and owner's equity of credit, 15,000. Clear so far? Yeah. Next. Second, you incurred 700 advertising costs on account. So here, ano nangyari? Si expense increased, so that's a debit in expense. Nag-increase si accounts payable, so that's an increase in accounts payable, a credit in your liabilities. And therefore, your journal entry would be advertising expense, debit of 700, accounts payable, credit of 700. So again, balance si debit at saka si credit because of your advertising expense on account. Next, yung 3. So, okay, the reason why I included this is, di ba, double entry. Sabihin nyo, bakit double entry? Tatlo to. Basically, double entry just refers na your debits will always balance with your credits every journal account. So, to prove this, we have 3 accounts. Pero ultimately, your debits and credits will still balance, like magic, right? So let's analyze. Nag-increase si cash ng 3,000. So that's debit in cash, right? Nag-increase si receivable ng 7,000. That's a debit in receivables. Si revenue has an opposite normal balance. And therefore, an increase in your revenue will be a credit of 10,000. So the journal entry would be debit cash of 3,000, debit accounts receivable of 7,000, and then credit of 10,000. So if you add your debits, that would be 10,000. Your credits would be 10,000. So super important na every journal entry, they should always balance their debits and their credits, right? And then your explanation was just breaking down na, honestly, lahat yan service revenue. 30% lang was paid in cash, 70% was paid on account. Last, 5,000 cash account decrease, and then 500 decrease in accounts payable. So now it's gonna be debit accounts payable, credit cash of 500. So again, debit accounts payable to signify na bumaba si accounts payable, and credit cash of 500 dahil bumaba. So yun. So again, you have simple journal entry and you have what you call compound journal entry. But regardless of what the journal entry is, it still upholds the double entry accounting. Before I move on to the last step of ledger accounts, do you have any questions or clarifications? Kindly thumbs up if clear pa naman so far. Yep, si MJ is okay. Cedric, okay. Okay. Perfect. So straightforward, right? So very procedural. Last, so we again ledger. So 'di ba si journal entry accounts for every transaction, right? Si ledger accounts for every records for every account, right? So the ledger is a summary of changes in the balance of each account. So again, very methodical accountant. So we perform it in chronological order and all debits and credits of one entry, right? So in essence, we have a ledger for every account. So for cash, we have a ledger. So again, I'm telling you na for journal entry, if the journal entry is just a formal entry of a transaction, so basically yung transaction, finormalize lang natin to a journal entry. The equivalent of that is that an account ledger is just the formal version of our T accounts. So basically, formal version lang yan ng T accounts natin, right? Na yung debits mo are still the debits here, and yung credits mo are still the credits here. And then the only difference is that sa ledger account, you have a running balance, right? Now, you start off with your beginning balance at 0. A debit in 15 will increase it to 15,500. Right? So we have 15,000. O, nagka-credit ka of 600. So minus 600. 14,400. Minus 3,000, another credit. 11,400. Minus 900. 10,500. So ang only ano lang naman ni ledger is that, Corey, I asked you, what is the balance of the cash account from April 5, right? We'll know kaagad na 10,500 siya kasi it's naka-line up, right? So again, so basically we just summarize the changes. So now debit na siya, 3,000. Magiging 3,500 yung balance. So every transaction you'll be able to see paano na-affect si balance. Then minus 600 in the next transaction. So 12,900 na siya after the transaction. Minus 500. Minus 2,500. Naging 9,900. And then the last debits would be 4,000 plus 5,000. Ultimately, it will give you your ending balance. But again, honestly, in future accounting, the ledgers parang important lang ito for procedural or the recording process. Pero ang mas ginagamit talaga natin would be T accounts. So you'll see that also in a comprehensive exercise that we'll be tackling. So, yan. So this is basically a ledger. So basically, kung pare, diba I asked you, yung chart of accounts nyo talks about 16 accounts. So if you have 16 accounts, you have to make 16 T accounts. And therefore, you have to also have 16 ledgers, right? Because again, a ledger is just a formal version of a T account. The only difference is that, number one, it has an explanation column so that, you know, kung mas gusto mo na explanation. You have your reference number. So lahat yan 101 because that would be your account code in your chart of accounts. And then it also has your running balance. Pero yung T account is more friendly in such a way na debits credits lang siya. And then honestly, pwede nyo rin lagyan ng date to para madali nyo matrack. So kung 15,000 April 1, ganun, para lang chronological siya. Pero for our parang para mabilis lang, I didn't include the dates na para you don't get confused. So the last step is posting, and we'll just have one simple illustration for this kasi mas ma-appreciate niyo yan later. So our first ever journal entry for BA 99.1 is debit cash, credit, owner's equity. Like what I always emphasize, yung journal entry focuses on a per transaction basis, while your ledgers focus on a per account basis. And therefore, isi-split lang natin si journal entry to the respective ledgers. So yung debit cash will be transferred here at 15,000 because ang pakialam lang nitong ledger account na to are what are the changes in cash, right? Wala akong pakialam kay owner's equity. So si ledger na owner's equity, yung may pakialam. So therefore, yung credit na to will fall under a new ledger account, which would be your owner's equity. Similar with your T accounts, right? Pag may T accounts tayo, ang pinapasok lang natin would be the debits or credits affecting that account. And then, the second T account, again, accounting for your debits and credits, right? So your cash of 15,000 is again going to your ledger account. And then your credit of owner's equity will go to your owner's equity ledger. So actually, that ends our lesson for today. So theoretically or conceptually, again, there's just 3 things that we have to do in the recording process. Analyze the transaction. So the way you analyze, pwedeng just reading it and then you understand that the increases or decreases, or you can opt for an advanced transaction analysis, whichever you prefer. Second, you look at it on a per transaction basis. So you journalize the entries. And then lastly, you summarize it on an account basis, right? Meaning you post to the different ledgers or you post to your T accounts, right? And then that's it. So that's your recording process. So again, you analyze the transactions, you journalize the entries per transaction. So if you have 12 transactions, you're expecting 12 journal entries, and then per account transaction. So ito per account level. So meaning, what do I mean? If you look at the headers, we have cash, receivable, supplies, equipment, accounts payable, notes payable, OC, OD, revenue expense. Those are just 10. So we expect 10 ledgers given this specific advanced transaction analysis. So last is mastering the trial balance. So again, our second God formula for accounting would be if assets is equal to liabilities and equity. For our second chapter, ang fanboys naman tayo is your debits should equal your credits. So in essence, in the 5 financial statements that we discussed, no financial statements can show you that your debits or your credits balance, right? And therefore, we have a supplementary tool called a trial balance, wherein it lists your accounts and your balances at a specific point in time. So this is like like your balance sheet for your debits and your credits, right? Why do I mean pseudo balance sheet? Because again, it focuses on a specific point in time. So we treat the trial balance similarly to our financial statement. So may headers muna tayo. So our headers would be the name of the company, the name of the statement or the tool, which is trial balance, and then as of April 30, 2020, because it is on a specific date. Now, let's look at the components of a trial balance. Well, in essence, these are all the accounts. So both your balance sheet account, so your cash, so basically your assets represented by your cash, AR, supplies, equipment, your liabilities, your AP, your notes payable, your owner's capital, so your capital, drawings, your revenue, and your expenses account, like broken down into their particular categorizations or accounts, right? And then you just ask yourself, ano ba yung ending balance nila? Debit or credit? And then you total. Just make sure na they balance. So to appreciate this, let's do Meowly, right? So si Meowly, ito yung subtotals niya, right? So basically, ipa-partner lang natin. Again, we ask ourselves when we create a trial balance. In our T accounts or in our advanced transaction analysis, what are the ending balances of this? So yung cash, positive 18,900. So yung 18,900 would be a debit, right? So all assets na positive, magiging debit yan. So 3,000 accounts receivable, supplies 900, equipment 3,000. Next, si accounts payable, their normal credit and their normal balance would be credit. Therefore, si 200 na AP will go to your credit. Si 5,000 will go to your credit. Si owner's capital, the normal balance would be credit also. So yung 15,000 na positive will go here. Si owner's drawings, again, when we write it in our advanced transaction analysis, naka-negative yan, right? Negative 600 para na mag-total yung balances natin. But again, when we look at debits and credits, we don't like negatives, right? So rather than negative 600, we know lang na the owner's drawing, which is typically a negative account, is 600, right? So kindly take note that this is not minus 600. This is 600 in its purest form. Pero alam natin na si drawings is a negative account. Okay? Next, revenue. What are your revenues? Normal balance of 10,000. So again, the normal balance of revenue is credit. Right? And then finally, you have your expenses. Now the normal balance is debits. But similarly, even though naka-negative yan in our advanced transaction analysis, in trial balances, we don't see negatives, right? So kung 600 yung expense, it's not minus 600, it's 600 or 25, 700, and 600. So we add everything together. 18,900 plus 3,000 plus 900 plus 3,000 plus 600 na owner's drawings plus 25 plus 700 na expense plus 600. So again, in debits and credits, we don't see negatives, right? So kailangan i-add nyo yan, hindi yan subtract. Yun lang, kindly take note. Kasi yun yung nalilito ako before na parang, bakit hindi nagbabalance? So yan na, so 30,200. So 30,000. Next, yung sa credit side naman tayo, 200 plus 5,000 plus 15,000 plus 10,000 is 30,200. So nagbalance, right? So yun. So actually that ends our conceptual. So like what I promised in the last 10 minutes, we're just gonna have like a master exercise to just talk more about the financial state, the recording process, right? So what we can do is just go through this exercise again. So before we jump into it, may questions ba from the class or not? Kindly thumbs up na lang if you can proceed na to the exercise. Yep. Okay. So far, we've tackled the whole recording process. We've introduced what a T account is, what a journal entry is, what is a T account, what is a ledger, etc. etc. So I understand, particularly kung hindi nyo pa napasadahan yung book, medyo parang too much information. Hopefully parang we were able to condense it. But for us to really appreciate the whole recording process, the only way we can do it is to record, right? So let's record using this company called Kevin Trin Welding for the month of June. So first question, how many transactions are there? There are a transaction in June 1, June 2, June 3, June 12, and June 19, right? So offhand, what I can expect is that I'll probably do 5 journal entries per transaction. 1 journal entry for June 1, for June 2, June 3, June 12, June 19. So let's do that. Kevin Trin invests 4,400 cash in a small welding business of which he is the sole proprietor. So in the chat, kindly follow this format. DRXX and then CRXX. Right? So kindly help me create a journal entry for this. What would be our journal entry for June 1? So let's analyze together, right? Number 1, we invest 4,400 in cash, and therefore our cash increases 4,400, right? And then our owner's capital also increases because nag-infuse tayo. So 4,400. So meaning, what would be our journal entry? Are there any guesses in the chats? So siguro I'll give 1 minute. Okay. So si Sky has. Okay. So thank you Sky. Thank you Kaylin. Okay. So Align. Okay. Denise. Okay. So Align. Thank you so much everyone. Si Russ. Okay. So Align tayo. So again, we have debit cash of 4,400, credit owner's equity. Because again, nag-increase si cash, therefore debit 4,400, owner's equity 4,000. Okay. Next, we purchase equipment on account for 990. Okay. So let's analyze again. Number 1, we purchased equipment. So nag-increase si equipment, right? On account. So, binayaran ba natin ng cash? No. Binayaran natin, inutang natin using accounts payable. So what are the things that happen? Number one, nag-increase si equipment. Number two, nag-increase si liability. So correct the people in the chat. It's gonna be a debit in equipment of 990 and then a credit of accounts payable of 990. Nag-increase si equipment, therefore debit 990. Nag-increase si accounts payable, credit accounts. Yeah. Thank you, Mavic. Thank you, Lance. Yeah. Correct. Next, June 3, 880 cash is paid to the landlord for June rent expense. Again, let's analyze the transaction. Number one, may rent expense. So tumaas si rent expense niyo, while at the same time, bumaba si cash kasi you paid in cash. So again, yep, so I'm seeing the correct answers in chat. Yep, so Kiara, yeah, correct. So yun. So again, we have debit rent expense to signify na nag-increase si rent expense. Pero bumaba si cash, right, ng liability. So, bumaba si cash. So credit cash of PTP. Last two. So bills, J. Leong, 930 for welding work done on account. So what happened? Nag-bill. So whenever you say you billed someone, that is a revenue, right? So nag-increase yung revenue niya ng 930. Now the question is, cash ba yung binayad sa kanya or on account? Sabi on account. So therefore, it's receivable. So, yep. So, good. I'm seeing the correct answers again sa chat. So, we have, yep. So, we have debit accounts receivable to signify na tumaas yung account assets natin at 930. And then, tumaas rin si service revenue pero credit yung ano niya yung normal niya. So, credit 930. Yep. Thank you so much. Yeah. And then last, we have received 450 from the partial payment of the previously billed work. So basically, yung accounts receivable before, nagbayad na siya ng cash. Therefore, tumaas si cash ng 450, pero bumaba si accounts receivable ng 450. And this is where the beauty of the double entry accounting system is. Because what will happen would be, correct, Isabel, yeah, na debit cash, so tumaas si cash, pero bumaba din si accounts receivable. Right? So credit 450. So at this point, tapos na natin yung comprehensive exercise, right? So we have 5 journal entries because there were 5 transactions. So we have our debits and our credits. So journal entry number 1, journal entry number 2, journal entry 3, all the way until 5. The next step that we need to do is to post this. So we post, right? So what did I say about posting? We do it chronologically. So chronologically, see journal entry 1 to 5. So let's ask ourselves, on an account level, so tataas na tayo, on an account level, what are the accounts mentioned? So sa journal entry 1, si cash raw, at saka si owner's equity were affected. So yun yung una kong dalawang T account na gagawin. Tapos, debit si cash. So 4,400 debit si cash. Credit si owner's capital. Yun. So nagpa-balance, right? Next journal entry. We have equipment. Wala pa akong T account nun. Accounts payable rin yung sunod. So probably I should add those 2 accounts. So equipment and accounts payable. Then again, we just plug it in. Debit equipment. So debit equipment. Credit accounts payable. Right? Left side, right side. Yun lang. Third journal entry. Rent expense. Oh, wala pa ako nun, the account. Pero cash meron na. So I'll just add rent expense. Right? So now debit rent expense. So left side. Credit cash, right side. Yep. And then journal entry 4. Accounts receivable, service revenue. May AR ba ako dito? Wala pa rin. Service revenue, wala pa rin. So we add the 2T accounts on an account level, AR and revenue. Again, plug in. 930 debit, so left side. Credit, 930, right side. Yep. And then lastly, we have the 5th journal entry. So cash, 450. credit 450. So at this point, we're done plugging in or posting into our T accounts. So when you do posting to your ledger, it's the same, pero mas matrabaho lang because there's a particular format. Right? So now the next is we subtotal 880, and then we have 4,400. So 4,400 is 450. So I have 4,850, right? So now we have 3,970 because pinagbangga, right? 3,970. Then the others, wala na silang others. So 440, credit, si owner's capital. Property, debit, 990. Accounts payable, credit, 990. Expense, debit, 880. Receivables, si receivables meron. So 930 debit, 450, right? Ano yung normal balance ng receivable? Debit, because it's an asset. Therefore, 930 is the positive and 450 is the negative. So 480. So I have a 480 debit balance of your accounts receivable. And then finally, a credit of 90. Right? So now we're done with posting. The last step is to write it in our trial balance. So basically, nakikita mo, si 3,970, debit pa siya, credit. Debit, dahil nasa left. So 3,970. Next, si owner's capital, 4,400. Credit, so 4,400. Si PPE, 990 na positive, debit. So 990. 480, si receivables, 480. Right? So basically, tinatabulate nyo lang. And then owner's drawings, wala tayo. Service revenue, so revenue, 930 credit, so 930. And then expense, 880. Then the last thing you do is to double check kung nag-balance, right? So you have 3,970 plus 480 plus 990 plus 880, 6,320. Correct? Last, we tabulate our credits. The credit of accounts payable of 990 plus 4,400 plus 930. 6,320. 6,000. Yep. So actually that ends our lecture for today. So before I officially end the recording, are there any questions regarding the lesson or the quiz or the exercises? Yeah. I'm opening the floor now to questions. Kung wala, kindly thumbs up na lang if none. Okay, so admin matters. So ang utang ko sa inyo would be to upload or to link you to the recording on Tuesday. And then second, we'll also give you the formal instructions for your quiz. In the email I'll send out, one of my co-profs mentioned that they started a Facebook group. I'm not sure if you guys have any Facebook, but then I'll send a link. So kindly join our Facebook group. The reason why I'm creating one is that by sa Monday, what will happen is I'll send an email at 9 a.m. strictly, which will give you access to the form. Now, parang I want to increase the number of channels na you can air out your concerns. So basically, you can email me or you can also ask in your accounting group. So I'll also upload there in our accounting group sa Facebook. Para lang you can check both email and Facebook. So super important, September 19, Monday, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. is the period. Again, please, parang trust yourself. Don't check. Huwag kayong mag-open book. Huwag kayong mag-Discord. Or huwag kayong mag-usap-usap. Don't ask anyone for help. Because promise, parang this is your parang first test. Kasi ang pinag-prepare naman natin hindi yung quiz eh. Ang pinag-prepare natin yung long exam. So now, mag-practice na tayo. So write manually, kasi manually yung required. And then organize your thoughts, handle the pressure, kasi kayang-kaya niyo yan. And then, kung meron pa kayong qualms, may doubts pa kayo, I'm opening the floor for any consultations. Sorry, I think there's a chat. Yes. So thank you, Denise. Actually, we have an exercise for this. I'll also upload it na rin. So basically, parang how it would look like is Monday, we have your quiz, and then Tuesday would be the deadline for the exercise. I'll upload them today without fail. Yeah. Yun lang. So if there's no more questions, thank you so much, everyone. So nakadalawang chapters na tayo. See, super kayang-kaya naman. And then we'll have 2 more to go in terms of like the fundamentals. Yun. So thank you so much, everyone, and I hope you have a great day. Thank you.